Ascending tracts. So we are talking about white matter, axons that have a common origin and destination. And they are of two types. One is known as the ascending tracts, the other is known as the descending tracts, right? The ascending tracts carry sensory signals up to the spinal cord. Sensory signals typically travel with three neurons, three different kinds of neuron, which is known as first order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron, which I'll show it to you in the next slide. Let's understand the ascending tract first. Ascending means it goes upwards, right? So these are sensory or afferent pathway that carry information from peripheral receptors, maybe from your skin, to higher centers, which can be brain or spinal cord. They transmit modalities, especially like pain, temperature, touch, vibration, proprioceptors, which is how you position, like you're standing or, the current position that you are in the environment, the accrued touch, and these are all part of the ascending track. So basically, as you can see in the figure, receptors from the body movement, limb position, maybe touch, pressure, etc., comes to the spinal cord. And then from the spinal cord, it goes into the medulla oblongata, midbrain, and then it can get processed into the cerebrum, which is the higher order of the brain. Okay, so how this entire process takes place is relatively complex, and it involves several neurons, but all of those neurons are sensory neurons. You have to remember that. There are different pathways by which different kinds of information transfer from one end of your body to the other end. How does it happen? We just learned, right? So from the receptor, which can be your skin, for example, it goes into the first order neuron, which is in the spinal cord, if you remember the dorsal root ganglion. And then it passes from its synapses to the second order neurons. Usually it is or into the medulla oblongata, it will go in there, and where crossing over would take place. And then it goes into the third order neuron, which is in the cortex. So this is a cross section of the spinal cord showing you in the different pathways, afferent pathways, which is the sensory or afferent pathway, and motor or descending pathway. Shown in blue are the sensory and afferent pathways. There are three different main sensory pathways, which we will be talking about. One is known as, we're starting from the bottom to the top. So again, just to orient yourself with the spinal cord, this is the anterior part of the spinal cord. This is the posterior part. This is the lateral region. Okay, so the first in here is the anterolateral system. It is also known as anterolateral spinothalamic tract. Okay, so it is anterolateral. It consists of two major tracts. One is known as anterior spinothalamic tract and the lateral spinothalamic tract. So the anterior is near the anterior part of the spinal cord, which is known as the anterior spinothalamic tract, and the one which is in the lateral part is known as the lateral spinothalamic tract. One important thing to remember here is the lateral spinothalamic tract receives information from the from the lateral to medial, from sacral region, lumbar, thoracic, and cervical region. So if you understand the spinal cord crosses from the sacrum region to the cervical region. So each of these part receive the neurons from each of these regions from the different parts of your body. Okay. Then come the spinocerebellar tract, which is again of two parts. One is anterior spinocerebellar tract and posterior spinocerebellar tract. One which is in the anterior part of the spinal cord is known as anterior spinocerebellar tract. One which is on the posterior region is known as a posterior spinocerebellar tract. Then comes the last, which is known as lemniscus system, which is the dorsal column, which consists of two major tracts. One is known as the gracilis funiculus. We know the white columns are also known as funiculus. So this is gracilis funiculus. This is this part which is on the medial side of the spinal cord, and cunate funiculus, which is on the lateral side in here. So as you similarly to that of the the lateral spinothalamic tract, this is divided as well, just in the opposite direction. Sacral regions information comes in here, then lumbar, thoracic, and cervical. So the ascending tract, three major tract. One is known as anterior lateral spinothalamic system or tracts. Then there is spinocerebellar tracts, and then there is dorsal column medial lemniscus system or tracts. So the function of each one of them and the origin we will learn in the next slide. So here we have the spinothalamic tract. As we said, it's divided into two major parts. One is known as lateral spinothalamic tract, anterior or ventral spinothalamic tract. This is mainly for pain and temperature. And this is for crude. The anterior part is for crude touch and pressure. Decussation, where do they cross? Both of them actually cross into the anterior white commissure of the spinal cord. So basically, they enter from the posterior end or dorsal part, and they cross the spinal cord, and then the final destination is in the thalamus, and then it goes into the somatosensory cortex. So again, the spinothalamic tract consists of anterior lateral system, which passes up to the anterior and lateral columns of the spinal cord. The spinothalamic tract carries signals of pain, temperature, pressure, tickle, itching also. In this tract, there is first order neurons end in the posterior horn of the spinal cord near the point of entry. Here they synapse with the second order neurons where they decussate and form the contralateral ascending spinothalamic tract. These fibers lead all their way up to the cerebral cortex. Next is the dorsal column. The dorsal column, as we learned, consists of two major group of nuclei. One is the funiculus gracilis, the other is funiculus cuneatus. And we know funiculus means white columns, okay? You can call it funiculus gracilis or gracilis funiculus, both are same, okay? The funiculus fasciculus, which is this in here, or gracilis funiculus, carries signals from the mid thoracic and the lower part of the body, as you can see in here, lower part of the body. And it consists of first order nerves that travel from ipsilateral, that is, ipsilateral means in the spinal cord, it travels on the same side to the medulla, and in the medulla oblongata it crosses. Since it goes from the same side of the spinal cord, it's known as ipsilateral, and then in the medulla oblongata it crosses. And then from the medulla oblongata, it goes to the thalamus and then to the somatosensory cortex in the brain. Again, it consists of first order nerve fibers that travel ipsilateral side of the spinal cord and terminate at the gracilis nucleus in the medulla oblongata of the brainstem. These fibers then carry signals of vibration, visceral plane, deep, and discriminative touch. So basically, it can you can basically tell the difference between the touch, right? One can be if you hold, for example, if a person holds your hands tightly, you can definitely differentiate between a light touch and a hard touch or a deep touch. And that is mainly done by that, which is basically proprioception. Proprioception is basically from the lower limbs and the lower trunk. Lower part of the body is for the fasciculus gracilis. Lower body parts are all the sensory reception comes into this fasciculus gracilis part. Very similarly, from the upper part of the body, from the comes the fasciculus cuneatus, right? So as you can see, the functions are pretty much the same: fine touch, vibration, but this is from the upper part of the body. It can be, it can be thorax. Usually, it is at the level of T6, and these are from upper part, and again it is ipsilateral in the spinal cord and crosses into the medulla, that goes into the thalamus and then into the somatosensory cortex in the brain. The last is the spinothalamic tract. Spinocerebellar tract. The spinocerebellar tract again is of two major parts. One is posterior and one is the anterior part. Travel from the lateral column and carry proprioceptive signals. Again, this is again proprioception. The posterior part carries unconscious proprioception. What is the difference between conscious and unconscious proprioception? For example, conscious proprioception goes through the dorsal column and unconscious proprioception goes through the cerebrocerebral tract. So conscious proprioception is when when you actually know your body position. Okay, so for example, if you are you're standing up, for example, it is whether you're standing, whether you're sitting, those are all conscious. That is, you understand your position in the environment or in the three-dimensional space. Okay, and unconscious is if you're standing, you always try to stand erect, right? So it's not like you don't train your brain to stand erect so that you don't fall. So that is unconscious proprioception. So the postal spinocerebellar, it is unconscious proprioception from the lower limbs and trunks. And the anterior ventral spinocerebellar is from unconscious proprioception from the lower limbs. The spinocerebellar tract in the anterior part of it crosses in the spinal cord and then again crosses in the cerebellum. Okay, so these are the different tracts. Let's review it again. So we are looking into the one that we had studied earlier. Shown in blue are the afferent or sensory pathway. So we're talking about anterior lateral system. Anterior lateral system, which is the spinothalamic tract. The spinothalamic tract is of two tracts, consists of two tracts. One is the lateral spinothalamic tract and one is the anterior spinothalamic tract. The lateral spinothalamic tract is mainly for pain and temperature, and the anterior spinal thalamic tract is main for crude touch and pressure. Okay, the lateral spinothalamic tract crosses in the spinal cord. Usually, it is for pain and in the pain receptors actually uh, goes about like 1 to 2 levels above in order to feel the plane. For example, if you feel the plane in the L2 region, usually it is below that. For example, if you feel the pain in the thoracic region and maybe T12 or T10, for example, usually the pain has originated much below that. So it passes from the lower level, goes higher, and there usually the pain is perceived. So, so it crosses into the spinal cord at the anterior white commissure, 1 to 2 levels above the entry, and the final destination is in the thalamus in the somatosensory cortex. The anterior part, which is anterior spinothalamic tract, is for crude touch and pressure. It crosses in the spinal cord near the anterior white corner. No, this is not above. It is at the level of the spinal cord. Crosses, but there's crossing over that take place, decussation in the spinal cord, and then it goes into the thalamus to the somatosensory cortex. Then we go into the dorsal column medial lemminous system. They are of two types. One is gracilis and the other is cunate. The gracilis is for fine touch, vibration, and it receives information from the lower part of your body. This is also fine touch, vibration, but it receives information from the lower part of the body. And you can see that, right? So the cunate actually receives from the upper part of their body, as you can see it in here, cervical and thorax, and gracilis receives it from the lower part of from the sacral and lumbar region. Then the last is the spinocerebellar tract. It is actually for unconscious proprioception from the posterior spinocerebellar tract receives information from the lower limb and trunk, and the anterior part receives it from the upper limb and it's double crossed. One crossing takes place in the spinal cord, one takes place in the cerebellum. So you can see it in here. The posterior spinal cerebral tract is really in here, where both of the posterior and anterior spinocerebral tract is for unconscious proprioception. One is the posterior part is for the lower limb and trunk, and the anterior part is for only lower limb. We are now into the next part, which is the descending tracks. So as we said, the descending tracks are the one that move from the brain or from the upper part of your of the CNS to the spinal cord, and then from the spinal cord it goes into the effector system. Okay, the effector being the muscles or the glands. In our case, we are just going to concentrate on the muscles. The descending tracts carry motor information from the brain stem and spinal cord, Descending motor tracts typically involves two neurons. Okay, what are the two neurons? We learned that before. One is the upper motor neuron, the other is the lower motor neuron. Okay, and the one speciality of this is, let's go to the next slide. The descending tracts, these are the descending tracts as shown in green. And one important information, the names of most descending tracts consists of a word root denoting the point of origin of the brain followed by a suffix which is spinal. Okay, so we will see that from the part from where it starts in the brain. For example, one is corticospinal. So it starts from the cortex and ends in the spinal cord. So it is called corticospinal tract. And we'll, as we name them, we will go over this in further details. But remember, these descending tracts bring information from the brain to the lower motor cortex, which the part that brings information from the brain is usually called the upper motor cortex, and then from the low spinal cord to the effector, it is the lower motor neurons. It is broadly, the tracts are divided broadly into two parts. One is known as the pyramidal or direct tracts. Voluntary fine movements are controlled by it. And here we are talking about skeletal muscles primarily, and extrapyramidal tracts are those which control posture, balance, reflex adjustment. So the descending tracts, there are of many types, depending upon where it's originating, the tracts are made in such a way. So let's go over the names first. First is the corticospinal tract, because it starts from, carries motor signals from the cerebral cortex, and you can see the, and it is, it leads into the spinal cord, and that's the region it's known as corticospinal tract. Okay, the corticospinal tract carry motor signals from the cerebral cortex, and it is for fine motor control. It's a voluntary skilled movement, and it crosses into the medulla, and especially fine motor controls of the limbs are mainly responsible. And that's the lateral part. And the anterior part of it, it actually, again, it's for axial and proximal muscle. Axial means everything near the facial muscles. We are talking about muscles of the thorax. It crosses in the spinal cord, and trunk and proximal muscles it controls. Rubrospinal tract will not do much because it's not very prevalent in human beings. Vestibulospinal tract consists of, again, two types. One is lateral, one is medial. The lateral maintains posture and balance, and does not cross. It goes ipsilateral to the brain. It goes, so the vestibular spinal tract begin in the brain stem, which is in the brain stem's vestibular nuclei, and that is the reason it's known as vestibulospinal tract. The lateral vestibular tract passes down to the anterior column of the spinal cord, and it facilitates neurons that control extensor muscles, mainly, as you can see. And this is actually very important because flexion, this the movement of muscles, flexor muscles, is important, and the medial vestibular spinal actually, so it starts from the brain stem, vestibular part of the vestibular nuclei of the brainstem, and that is the reason it's known as vestibulospinal tract. And it is mainly for the neck muscle movement, okay, the medial part. Reticulospinal tract, is originates from the reticular formation of the brainstem. Okay, the reticular formation one is the medial one starts from the pontine, and the reticular one and the other medullary one starts from the medulla, and so both are responsible. This the pontine or medial reticular spine, it helps in extensor tone and posture, and the lateral, it actually inhibits extensor tone. So uh, these have opposing function. And technospinal tract, it starts from the tectum of the midbrain, and then it is mainly for head movements, visual and auditory stimulus. That whenever you feel, you hear something, your head moves towards that direction, and the crossing over takes place in the midbrain. It is mainly for neck muscles. So let's review this once more through these tracks. So if you see in here, the motor descending tracks are shown in red. There are, this is again orienting you with the spinal cord. This is the posterior part. This is the anterior part. So the pyramidal tracks, I want to mention one very important thing, that these motor tracks or descending tracks are not present in the anterior or dorsal part of the spinal cord. Okay, so the pyramidal tracts, as you can see it in here, the anterior corticospinal tract is in the anterior part, and the lateral corticospinal cord is in here. Okay, and the extrapyramidal tract, which is rubrospinal tract, which we said is not present much in the human beings. Reticulospinal tract is present in this region, in the lateral region, and some is present in the anterior part also. Okay, and then the vestibulospinal tract is actually on the anterior part of the spinal cord, vestibulospinal tract. Okay, so going with the functions, the lateral spinal corticospinal tract is mainly uh, for voluntary and skilled movement of the skeletal muscles. The lateral corticospinal tract is, as you can see, it starts from the sacral region and goes into the cervical region. And then the anterior corticospinal tract is also for voluntary movement, but for axial and proximal muscles. The vestibulospinal tract, which is in here, these tracts are lateral, and we learned like it is lateral and medial, and it's mainly for posture and balance. The reticulospinal tract, which is here and here, as you can see, which is pontine and medullary, and they are for extensor. One facilitates extensor, one inhibits extensor movement. And the last is tectospinal tract, which is actually not shown here. Um, and it is mainly for movement of the head towards auditory and visual responses. So the next part is on lower motor neurons. This is the last part of the how the entire control of movement take place. Okay, so we started from ascending neurons. So neurons take in information, as you can see. These are the sensory neurons which take in information. It is actually processed in the spinal cord, and then from the ventral root, it comes out. Okay, so this entire process from the anterior root can go into the spinal cord from the sacrum to the cervical, and then it can go to the brain. and then it can come back through the motor neurons and have its effect. Okay, so here, as you can see it in here, we are talking about the different parts of the muscles of our body being controlled by the different spinal nerves that come in. And these spinal nerves, remember, are responsible for control of these skeletal muscles in different parts of our body. So the last part, so we learned about motor neurons. We know motor neurons are of two types. One is upper motor neuron that we just learned, and then there are lower motor neurons, right? So the lower motor neurons are the ones that control the skeletal muscle, okay? We are talking about skeletal muscles primarily, okay? So lower motor neurons and muscle fibers. And when I say muscle fibers, I mean skeletal muscles. Okay, so lower motor neurons can be of two types. One is known as alpha motor neurons, and the other is known as the gamma motor neurons. Okay, the what is if you look in here, you will see that from the ventral root, we said that the motor neurons come out, and both of this, whether it's alpha or gamma, they come out from the ventral root. One is shown in green, is the alpha neuron, and one shown in purple is the gamma motor neuron, and their function and action is slightly different. Okay, so for in order to study the alpha motor neurons, we need to know their target part or organ or which fiber it controls, and that is there are two fibers that we will learn in here, which is known as extrafusal muscle fibers, and the other is intrafusal muscle fibers. Okay, the extrafusal muscle fibers is basically the bulk of the muscle. Okay, and intrafusal muscle are on the inner part of the muscle fibers. So in order to understand the extrafusal muscle fibers and intrafusal muscle fibers, we need to understand a little bit about the skeletal muscle. So this is, I have a separate video on skeletal muscle contraction. You can go ahead and visit that. But in just what we need to now know for this part of the lecture is these are the muscles you can understand. These are the outer level is known as epimysium, and then the inner covering is known as perimysium. And these are made up of compartments which are known as muscle fascicle. Okay, so each of these muscle fascicle in turn is made up of muscle fibers. Okay, so what are muscle fibers? Muscle fibers are nothing but muscle cells. Muscle we use in case of muscle, we do not call muscle cell, we usually call them muscle fibers. They are multinucleated and very, very large. Okay, so if I take a muscle fiber or a muscle cell, this is how it will look like. A muscle fiber consists of small myofibrils, as is shown in here. Okay, these myofibrils are made up of actin and myosin filaments and is covered by sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, sarcoplasmic reticulum is a main source where calcium remains stored in these muscles. So calcium is very important for muscle contraction, and these are stored in these places, these bulge places, which are known as triads. Okay, and near the triads there are T tubules, and they are all involved in the action potential so that the calcium can be released from the muscle. Once calcium is released from the muscle, it goes into a process which is known as sliding filament theory, which is basically movement of actin and myosin, and which causes contraction. It involves binding of the calcium with troponin tropomyosin complex, which leads to contraction. The reason why we are learning this is in order for you to understand that these muscle fibers, in turn, if we go back, in turn are made up of two different types of fibers. One is known as extrafusal fibers, the other is known as intrafusal fibers. Extrafusal fibers make the bulk of the muscle, and intrafusal muscles are in the inner part of the muscle. They are mainly responsible to regulate stress reflex, okay? And we will learn how they function, but I want you to look at this and understand these are all extrafusal fibers, and in here, these are the intrafusal muscles. The extrafusal muscle fibers are innervated by alpha motor neurons, and the intrafusal fibers are innervated by gamma motor neurons. Okay, that's the difference between each of them. So here we are actually talking about how this, what is the function of the alpha motor neurons and the gamma motor neurons, which is the lower motor neurons. Okay, so lower motor neurons, which consists of alpha motor neurons and gamma motor neurons, and you can see it in here. The alpha motor neurons innervate the extrafusal membrane, and the gamma motor neurons innervate the intrafusal membrane. The coordination of alpha motor neurons and gamma motor neurons is very, very important. I want you to picture this so that you understand in the next slide that this intrafusal membrane is inside the extrafusal membrane. So we are talking about two innervation of the lower motor neurons, one by alpha, which is on the extrafusal, the other is by the gamma in the intrafusal membrane. So when the alpha motor neurons innervate the extrafusal membrane, it contracts. How it contracts? We did this in the muscle. You have to understand when these are coming in, it is releasing acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter responsible. Action potential is created, release of acetylcholine happens. This goes into the muscles. The muscles have receptors for acetylcholine. Acetylcholine actually is then responsible for release of the calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle. Okay, so we learned that in the sarcoplasmic reticulum there are calcium present. Now, release of this calcium leads to binding of the calcium with troponin-tropomyosin complex. As a result, the contraction happens. Okay, now this contraction of the extrafusal fiber, what happens is, we'll see it in this. So this is the muscle. So alpha motor neurons are coming in. You can see the breadth of this, in the center, it's a bulged area, the muscle as it looks. When contraction happens, the center part becomes more thicker. And as a result, what happens is the inner part, which contains the intrafusal fibers, there is a slack formed in here. And this slack formed in here, what happens, the alpha motor neurons can no longer be able to innervate these extrafusal fibers. If it cannot innervate, then the entire contraction process will subside or not take place. For this very reason, there is gamma motor neuron. These gamma motor neurons and alpha motor neurons, they innervate at the same time so that the slack formation does not happen. So the alpha motor neurons act, the gamma motor neurons act, this causes contraction, but the slack formation is actually inhibited by the gamma motor neurons in the intrafusal membrane. As such, the innervation by alpha motor neuron and the excitation by the release of acetylcholine can continue, and the process of contraction can take place. So, in the process of contraction of skeletal muscle, the lower motor neurons, which consists of alpha motor neurons and gamma motor neurons, both play a very significant role. Again, how it takes place: alpha motor neurons innervate the extrafusal membrane, gamma motor neurons innervate the intrafusal membrane, and as such, if gamma motor neurons are not present, then there will be a formation of slack when contraction happens, but it does not happen so because of the gamma motor neurons which innervate the intrafusal membrane. As such, the muscle contraction happens without a slack. As such, the alpha motor neuron can continue its action. This process is known as co-activation of alpha and gamma motor neurons. Okay, so you can look in here, you can see the command is coming from the spinal cord or the brain into the extrafusal membrane. Whenever there is alpha motor neuron activation of the extrafusal membrane, there is a slack formation, but the gamma motor neuron comes into the picture, into the intrafusal membrane, and tightens it. As such, there is tension formed in the muscle fibers. Contraction takes place, and a continued feedback to the CNS happens. This is in all the entire process in which the entire contraction process takes place in spinal cord, where it can take place from, we are talking about when you are actually touching a nail and retracting your foot from it. The entire ascending neurons take information to the CNS through the ascending tract, and then processes it, and through the descending or motor tracts it comes back. And then there's the two lower motor neurons, which is alpha motor neuron and gamma motor neuron, which has its effects on the extrafusal fibers and interfusal fibers, and as such the ultimate contraction happens.